mountains do not forget. They hold every whisper, every scream, every sin inside their ridges, pressing it down beneath soil and root until it hardens into legend. Somewhere deep in those Appalachian folds where the dirt roads end and the hollows close in there lived a family that townsfolk only dared to name in hushed voices. The Grangers, a clan born in secrecy, raised in shadows, and remembered with dread. To some, they were just mountain folk, too poor and too proud to leave. To others, they were something far darker, the twisted remnants of generations who turned inward, who shunned the outside world, and who, in their hunger, crossed a line no family should ever cross. The story begins not with the family as a whole, but with a cabinet's roof sagging beneath decades of rain, its windows blind, its door warped like a mouth half open. Those who dared approach it spoke of the smell first, the pungent mix of smoke, damp wood, and something metallic, something acrid, that clung to the air even when the wind turned. Children whispered that bones lay in the yard, scattered like kindling, though no one could say for certain if they belonged to animals or men. Inside, life was a prison without walls. The Granger children grew up under the rule of a father who was more warden than parent. His voice, gravelly from whiskey and years of silence, carried the weight of commands that could not be refused. Blood stays with blood, he would rasp, and the children, too young to question, too frightened to disobey, obeyed. A daughter became a wife, a brother became a husband. And so, generation by generation, the family tree curled back upon itself like a serpent devouring its own tail. But hunger was the true master in that cabin. The land was poor, rocky, and stingy with its offerings. Crops withered in the thin soil, game grew scarce in the woods, and the children's bellies ached with an emptiness that no cornbread could fill. It was in those lean winters that the unthinkable took root. A pig slaughtered early, a deer brought down in silence when those were gone. Rumors said, the Grangers turned to darker meat. Strangers who vanished on the road, a wanderer who never came back from the woods. The whispers grew until even hardened hunters crossed themselves when passing the Granger land. The children of the Grangers bore the weight of both their lineage and their father's law. Their faces carried the telltale signs of blood folded back upon blood, jaws that jutted at strange angles, eyes that wandered in different directions, limbs twisted by birth. They were ridiculed when seen, mocked as half-people, and so they retreated further into the hills, their deformities hidden in shadows, their voices never heard beyond the trees. But inside the cabin, where daylight seldom reached, they learned the lessons carved into them like scars: obedience, secrecy, survival. One son, barely a man, once asked why they could not leave, why they could not step into the world beyond the mountain ridge. His father struck him so hard he fell into the fireplace, embers scorching his flesh. Out there, they'd hang you, the father snarled, his spit sizzling as it hit the coals. Here, you're Granger, here, you live. The boy carried the burn all his life, a mark of both his defiance and his defeat. The neighbors, what few there were, saw enough to fuel their fears. A cow that went missing. Screams carried on the night wind. The faint glow of firelight flickering in the hollow long after midnight. But fear has its own way of silencing a community. The sheriff made excuses. The preacher preached about God's punishment, and the townsfolk chose the safety of ignorance. To name the Grangers outright was to invite them into your dreams, to hear the creak of your own door at night. And so, the family endured, shunned and feared, sealed within their cabin like a tomb that would not stay closed. Inside, the daughters bore children who were their own siblings. The mothers gave birth to sons who were also their nephews, and each new life carried the weight of the old blood, thicker, darker, more poisonous with each generation. Yet, for all their deformities, for all their whispered sins, there was something unbroken in the Grangers, a devotion to each other, fierce and unquestioning. They might have been reviled by the outside world, but in that hollow, behind those sagging walls, they were one. One family, one secret, one unending cycle. The truth of what happened in the Granger cabin may never be fully known. Some say it was madness, others survival, still others a curse that sank into their bones long before they were born. But what we do know is this: when the cabin finally burned, whether by accident or by unseen hand, the fire lit the sky like a warning. The townsfolk gathered on the ridge and watched the flames devour wood, memory, and flesh alike. They said the screams that night were not only of the dying, but of every soul that had ever been trapped in that house of blood. Yet even in the ashes, bones remained. Bones that did not match the count of the family. Bones too long, too heavy, to have come from the Grangers alone. The mountains do not forget, and in the case of the Grangers, neither should we. Names. That's what separates most families from legend. But when it comes to the Grangers, names are scarce, half-remembered, and often whispered as if speaking them aloud would summon their shadows back into the hills. The father was known only as Ezekiel Granger, a towering man. Even as the years bent his frame, his face was a map of old scars, many self-inflicted from drunken rages. Ezekiel was the law inside the cabin, and his word was as absolute as the mountains themselves. He carried an iron rod instead of a cane, and with it, he carved obedience into the flesh of his children. To the outside world, he was seen rarely, and when he was, he smelled of sweat, smoke, and whiskey so strong that people crossed the street to avoid him. Beside him, though never truly equal, was his wife, his own daughter. No one ever agreed on her name. Some said Mary, others swore it was Eliza. What they did remember was her silence. She rarely spoke, and when she did, her voice came out broken, almost childlike. Years of being both daughter and wife, mother and sister, had carved away her mind until she was little more than a shadow moving from cradle to fire, cooking, cleaning, and birthing children she scarcely understood. The children themselves were walking reminders of the family's cycle. One boy, called Jacob, was born with a twisted spine. His back bent so severely he walked hunched like an old man, though he was barely 13. Another child, Sarah, had a face both haunting and tragic, one-eyed milky white, the other bright blue, set too far apart to ever meet. Her jaw jutted, and when she smiled, which was rare, it revealed teeth, crooked and sharp like a predator's, perhaps. The most infamous of them all was Thomas Granger, the boy with the burn. His cheek and neck carried the raw, twisted scar from the fireplace, leaving him disfigured in a way even the inbred deformities could not disguise. Neighbors who caught glimpses of him said his eyes carried something different, something aware, as if he knew what his family had become, but was too trapped to escape it. They said Thomas would sometimes linger on the ridge, staring down at the town, before vanishing back into the trees when spotted. The daughters, once they came of age, did not leave. They became mothers to their own brothers' children. The cycle closed tighter, like a noose. By the time the third generation filled the cabin, many of the children could barely speak. Their words came out as grunts, guttural sounds closer to animals than humans. Some could not walk upright, others shuffled in silence, their eyes vacant, their tongues too thick for language. It was then that the town's fear hardened into terror. Strange livestock killings plagued the outskirts. Goats and chickens vanished, their carcasses later found stripped with an efficiency no wild animal could match. One hunter swore he saw two of the Granger boys crouched over a deer carcass, tearing at it with their bare hands. When he fired a warning shot, they bolted into the underbrush, moving faster than seemed possible, their limbs jerking in unnatural rhythm. He never hunted that hollow again. Children dared each other to walk the road, past the Granger land. Most only made it a few yards before turning back, swearing they saw shadows moving in the trees. Some told stories of a figure with glowing eyes, peering out from the cabin window at night. Others said they heard a baby crying, though no baby had been seen in town for years. The sheriff, pressured by whispers of missing travelers, rode out once with a deputy. They returned pale, shaken, unwilling to speak of what they saw. The deputy soon left town entirely. The sheriff simply stopped riding that road, and so the Grangers remained isolated, feared, half human and half legend. The deformities of their bodies were visible, but what lay inside the hunger, the silence, the obedience to Ezekiel's law was far worse. Some say that by the end, the Grangers no longer saw the difference between family and prey. In the cabin's dark corners, meat was roasted, bones cracked from marrow. When townsfolk found animal bones discarded in the yard, they prayed they were right, that they truly belonged to animals. But not everyone believed. Not everyone was convinced those bones were from deer, pigs, or cattle. And if they were right, it meant the Grangers' hunger had already crossed into a darkness no one dared name. It began with smoke, thick black smoke rolling down the hollow one bitter winter morning. The people of town gathered in silence, their breath clouding in the cold air, eyes fixed on the ridge where the Granger cabin had stood for nearly half a century. No one ran to help. No bucket lines formed. The fire was allowed to eat and consume, because deep down the town had long decided the cabin was not a home but a curse. Some swore they heard screams within the crackle of the flames, animal-like wails that did not sound fully human. Others claimed they saw figures dart through the smoke, scrambling on all fours, before vanishing back into the inferno. By the time the roof collapsed, the sky above the mountain was red, glowing like an open wound. When the fire cooled, curiosity warred with terror. Men from the town crept up the path, boots crunching in ash. What they found inside the remains silenced, even the boldest among them. Beneath the charred beams and smoldering debris lay bones. Some were small, fragile, unmistakably human. Others were larger, cracked open, the marrow gone. The stench of roasted flesh lingered in the air, heavy enough to choke. One man bent down and picked up a skull, no bigger than a child's, its jaw fused crooked, its teeth jagged. He dropped it instantly, whispering a prayer through clenched teeth. The sheriff ordered silence. "Nothing here," he muttered, though his voice shook. "We'll bury what we found. No one speaks of this, but secrets cannot be buried in fire." The legend of the Grangers spread far beyond that hollow. Travelers warned each other not to take the back roads, not to stray too deep into the Appalachian woods. Campfire tales turned Ezekiel into a giant with blood on his hands, Mary into a ghost who still wandered the hills, children trailing behind her like shadows. The Grangers became less a family and more a warning, what isolation, secrecy, and inbreeding could do when left to fester unchecked. Even now, some claim the Grangers were never fully gone. Hikers speak of cabins hidden deeper in the brush, smoke curling from chimneys that shouldn't exist. Hunters whisper of shapes crouched over kills, scattering when lights pierce the trees. And in certain lonely corners of Appalachia, when night falls heavy and the wind carries strange cries across the ridges, old folks murmur that the bloodline never truly ended, that something survived the fire. What remains is not merely a story of deformity or hunger. It is the chilling truth that human beings, when trapped in cycles of secrecy and silence, can become something unrecognizable even to themselves. The Grangers remind us of a truth, too dark to dismiss, that sometimes the greatest horrors are not born of monsters, but of families, and in the mountains. Families never truly disappear. The Granger cabin is ash now, its timbers scattered, its name spoken only in whispers. But legends like theirs never burn away. They linger in the smoke that clings to the trees, in the bones buried beneath blackened soil, in the stories mothers still tell their children to keep them from wandering too far into the woods. The Grangers are gone, yet their silence is not, and in Appalachia, silence is often more terrifying than screams. If this story haunted you, know there are more. More families, more secrets, more shadows hidden in the folds of history. Subscribe, share, and walk with us deeper into the darkness, because the past does not die in the flames. It waits, patient and hungry, for the moment someone dares to remember.